Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, gents.
Hi, Ron.
We'll just move on from that.
Literally just said he doesn't have a lot of time to edit.
I know, sorry.
No, and then
Foolishness.
I got called Robe today by somebody in Buenos Aires. That happened. But anyway, moving on. So welcome back. All four of us not together quite as closely as we were a week ago, but nevertheless, back in our virtual room to talk about all things in the NFL. So we're going to skip past a lot of the fodder that other podcasts and news outlets might deal with, all the lovely kind of preseason tropes about the game slowing down for rookies and second-year players and so on. And we're going to jump straight into the big meaty topics. And this week we have picked, who do we have as our comeback player in the NFL for the 2021 season? So that gives us a huge number of players coming off the back of a very disappointing 2020, whether through injury, form or combination of the two. So 4 players to discuss, maybe a few Brucey bonuses as we go. And Aldrin, for this topic, I am throwing over to you first. Who's your comeback player for 2021?
Well, I had a few, and I think it's a weird season for comeback players, purely because there's a lot of players that you would have hoped might be on the cusp of that kind of comeback year. I think you look at Carson Wentz, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, that kind of trio of quarterbacks that you're looking at kind of leading their franchises. But all of them seem to be off to a bit of a slow start. I think, injury and maybe lack of form, certainly in the Burrow camp, it sounds like he's well off the pace at the moment. So those are the players that you would traditionally think might be those kind of comeback players. But one of the guys that I picked as my comeback player, and it feels like an eternity since we saw him play and kind of be at the pinnacle of the NFL, but it's Odell Beckham Jr. I think he, for me, it kind of feels like he's been out for so long because he missed basically all of last season and then a whole big swathe of the season before, and he's coming off an ACL tear. But a lot of the camp buzz is that he's looking fit, he's making good cuts, and they're kind of easing him back into action and building that rapport with Mayfield again. But I just think the guy is so talented, and I think him and Landry together are probably 2 of the safest hands in the league, certainly when you watch their kind of catch radius and the way they haul the ball in. So I just think the guy has got this, he's really got a will to win, and I think people forget that about him. I think he comes with the kind of swag and the money and the glamour, but really when you look at his time in at the Giants and even at the Browns, you really get a sense that the guy wants to compete, wants to win, wants to do well. And I certainly feel like this will add an extra chip on his shoulder because he's kind of fallen out of that top tier wide receiver discussion. I think, he's missed so much time, and feels like a long time since he was, making that twisting, bending, one-handed catch into the end zone. So I just feel like that chip and just the Browns offense as well. I think they're pretty exciting to watch, and they certainly progressed last year. And I think having OBJ back is going to make that an exciting offense. So he's the guy that I'm going to pick as that comeback player of the year. And boy, how good would it be to see him playing at a top level again?
So for me, it's a super interesting pick because we're talking about a guy who, like you say, isn't really even in the wide receiver conversation anymore when you talk about top tier guys, who was once probably as close as any non-quarterback has got to being the face of the league, wasn't he? I mean, he had that, like you say, when you talk about the catch and various things, he really was about as big a superstar as the league had. Here's my challenge with it. You said about, he's coming back at a good time because now the Browns offense is a lot more exciting. I think there's a bit of ipso facto there where actually, is it not the case really that the Browns offense seemed to look a lot better once he was injured almost? Once you felt like maybe Baker Mayfield wasn't, forcing the ball to him, or once Landry was able to, run more of those WR1 type routes. And I don't know, it's a weird thing with OBJ that it's just never really happened for him in Cleveland, has it? And I don't think he necessarily came from a great setup in New York. He was certainly at the time the bright light, the bright shining star they had. But there was something about Eli Manning to Beckham Jr. that just had a certain, I don't know, it was like clockwork, wasn't it? They just did seem to understand each other, and certainly Manning was happy to put the ball up there and let OBJ do his thing in a way that hasn't quite happened yet. I mean, I think if it does happen, not only do I think it's a great thing for the league and obviously a great thing for him individually, it's a really great thing for the Browns. I mean, if they can get, Landry has always really been a threat, for the weird and wonderful situations and ultimately rosters he's found himself on. He's always found a way to get the numbers, to be relevant, to make game-changing type plays. And I think with the running backs they have in the backfield, OBJ having a comeback type year completely changes the outlook for the Browns. They go from competitive divisional team to a team suddenly with Super Bowl type star quality. I'd love it. I just wonder whether, when it comes to Cleveland, for some reason, is it just that Beckham might be part of the problem, and maybe it's that other people try and do too much because it's him. Maybe Baker Mayfield forces the ball or looks to him too often, but yeah, I'm just yet to see that click, whether he's fit and healthy or not.
I don't know. I agree. I totally get it. I think it's not quite worked in Cleveland just yet, but I do think him being out of that offense and that offense looking relevant and fairly slick probably benefits him this year, because it's not like a couple of years ago where everybody's expecting him to be the guy, like he was in New York, where it's him or nothing. Whereas I think that offense has functioned really quite well in the last year entirely without him. So easing him back in just adds such a potent weapon that you don't necessarily have to lean on for every snap, every play, every look.
Actually looking at his stats as well, to be fair, 2019, when he obviously didn't have the injury hit year with Cleveland, he topped 1,000 yards. 14 yards per reception, longest of 89. Maybe the splash and the game-winning kind of performances weren't there, but maybe I'm being a little harsh. But I suppose we're talking about him returning to top tier, and I'm not sure 1,000 yards is maybe enough to put him in that kind of spectre, but I'd love to see it, because the guy, when he's on form, is just something to behold.
Well, I think the consideration that we have to make is we haven't seen an Odell Beckham Jr. in what the Browns would refer to as the Browns team. Obviously, he joined them for the 2019 season. Freddie Kitchens, one and only. Should Freddie Kitchens have been the head coach of the Cleveland Browns? No, probably not. And I think they realised that, which is why they got rid of him after a year. That start of the Kevin Stefanski run was very much like any other first-time head coach. It was working out the ways to maximize your players, accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, work out how to play. And I think before he could really work out the best way to utilize Odell Beckham Jr., he hasn't got him anymore. And all of a sudden now you're watching an offense that is very Jarvis Landry. It's very Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. It's very Baker Mayfield kind of scrambling to keep plays alive. Would that Browns team look different with OBJ playing at top level? Yeah, absolutely, because as he's shown for the Giants, when he's on, he is absolutely on. There is a reason that one-handed catch versus the Cowboys is one of the most iconic catches of all time. I do think it is a little bit, though, that to kind of go along with what Rob was saying, of is he part of the problem rather than part of the solution? And I think there is always that sense that when you have a player like him, you have to feed him the ball. You have to get the ball to him in order to maximise it. And that was fine for those Giants teams because, with the greatest of respects to them, it was kind of OBJ at the top, and then there was a bit of a drop before you really got to anybody else. In this Browns team, there are so many mouths to feed. It's a little bit like a Cleveland Browns version of Hungry Hippos. Everyone is gobbling for the ball, and there's only so many touches to be distributed. And I think part of the reason the Browns really came together at the end of it was because they worked out, we've got two really good running backs. Maybe what we should do is ride them, and the passing game will unwrap because of it. So then you're taking an offense that is now leaning even more into running the ball and even less opportunities for it to go through the air. But again, we're talking about a team that didn't have their 2-star receivers. They only had one of them. I would probably put quite a bit of faith in Stefanski and the Browns to pull something out of Beckham this season. But at the same time, if I'm wrong, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I'm not expecting big things from him, to be fair. I think his last season in New York, I don't think he was particularly amazing. And I think people remember him for the one-handed catch. And he's made a couple of other spectacular plays. And he had the little feud with Josh Norman, didn't he, where he kicked the kick in practice net and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of hype around him. But, I don't think in the last 2, even 3 seasons, you can really say that he's done anything to qualify himself as one of those kind of top level players. I think a number of guys that have come into the league have overtaken him, and performances from maybe some longer standing players have kind of improved, over his performance. So I think he, if he wants to be seen as one of those top level players, then I think he needs to have a big season here. But I don't know if he's just a spent force, to be honest. He's had some pretty bad injuries. So, it gets harder, I think, as a wide receiver. The older you get, the more injuries you get, the more wear and tear on your body. So, I don't know. He could surprise us. It could go either way. He could surprise us and he could have a smashing season and come out and look like a top 10 receiver. But for me, I'm not sold on it, to be honest.
So I suppose I end up where Phil is for different reasons. He's one of those players that if he'd have been traded somewhere, and I know the reality is, the salary cap probably didn't make that a possibility for a lot of teams who would have been interested. But actually, you kind of, in Cleveland, I wonder how much of the problem is Baker Mayfield to Beckham Jr. rather than Beckham Jr. himself. I mean, just looking at those stats, and I have had to look them up, but they were kind of on the tip of my tongue when I was talking earlier. So last season, when Mayfield was under centre for the Browns in games without Beckham Jr. in the lineup, his passer rating was 91.1, right? It dropped to 69 with Beckham Jr. on the field. Now, I rate Baker Mayfield. This isn't damning Baker by any means, but I just wonder if that, I don't know, even if it's subconscious that they're trying to force him the ball causes them more problems, particularly, as you say, JB, when ultimately, when you've got, particularly Nick Chubb, but I mean Kareem Hunt as well, you almost feel like you just put the game on their shoulders at times, don't you, and run the ball till people can stop you. If they can get this right, it could be spectacular. I would probably feel more bullish about Beckham Jr. getting back to his best. I don't know, if he'd ended up somewhere else and was maybe used in a slightly different offense. But do you know what? I'm with you, JB. I don't think either eventuality is impossible, that he kind of ends his career with a what might have been, or we kind of find over the next year or two that his best is yet to come. So Aldrin, you have set a tone and a remarkable shout. Like you, I have a few players in mind. But as Phil said, I mean, I've not really thought of OBJ at all. He'd just not come into my thinking in the slightest. So a cracking start, and that means, JB, you get to follow that up with your comeback player. Who do you want to put on the table?
Well, I agree that I think Aldrin set us off on a great note there. And how do you follow up something like that? And, it's tricky it's tricky. It's tricky. And we're not talking about run DMC. We're talking about run CMC.
Oh, the segue. Goodness me.
Jesus
Thank you
God.
very much. Come
Well,
on.
Freaking.
Can you put some like segue music in there or something?
Yeah.
Christian McCaffrey in 2019 set career highs and in some ways Panthers highs in almost everything. It was highs in rushing attempts, rushing yards. He set his longest run, which was an 84-yard touchdown, the longest single touchdown run by a running back in Panthers history. Most touchdowns from rushing, most receptions, most receiving yards. He became one of only 3 players in NFL history to have over 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards. And last year, he played in 3 games and he totaled 225 rushing yards and 149 receiving yards. And I know that there is a member of our podcast here who drafted Christian McCaffrey quite high in their fantasy team because of the generally held belief of he was the heart behind that Panthers team. So watching him go down so early in the season was a bit gutting for several reasons. Much like OBJ, I think we're sat here looking at, well, who is Christian McCaffrey? What is he going to come back to? Because it's not the same Panthers team where he set all of those highs. You know, last year was Matt Rule's first year. Did it go as well as he would have liked? No, probably not. And they've already moved on. They're already on their sort of second potential franchise quarterback in Sam Darnold. How is that going to work for someone like CMC when he's not getting the ball from Cam Newton / I want to say Kyle Allen? Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or Teddy Two Gloves last year. How is it going to work and how are they going to utilize him? Is he going to be that double threat of rushing or receiving? Are they going to try and utilize him more as a standard conventional running back? And it's for me, it's kind of the big thing out of Carolina is that thing. It's all about Christian McCaffrey and less so about like what Sam Darnold going to be like. Should the Panthers have stayed with Teddy or something like that? Because much like I talked about with the Browns got their running game going and started putting wins together. We have spoken at large about the Titans' success in Derrick Henry and kind of what a good running back can do to you and what an exceptional offensive weapon can do to your team. And Christian McCaffrey is that, but is that what we're going to see here? Does Matt Rule know how to get the best out of him? Because in those 3 games last year, I'm not entirely sure that he did. I'm not entirely sure we saw what Christian McCaffrey can do. And is that just because he was a bit knocked up, or is that just because Matt Rule wasn't really sure how to deal with him? And are we going to see a different game plan in this season?
I don't know. He's a player that I absolutely love because I think he's, he doesn't break the mold for running backs, but you just never quite saw it coming when he came into the league, I don't think, and he looks amazing now. My concern is the amount of time he missed last year, and it's never a good thing for a running back. I think he missed basically a full season through injury. It's not like we had a couple of years ago where, Bell missed time and he didn't want to play. I just think you miss a lot of time and that creates problems. On the flip side of that, I think I do genuinely think that Darnold coming in is a better situation than they probably had. I would hope that the offense improves such that they don't quite need to lean on him as much. And I think he would be more effective in that situation where he doesn't have to be everything for that team. I think that's, that partly adds to your wear and tear. I know you talked about his numbers there, and they're phenomenal numbers, but equally, when you put so much on one player, you inevitably end up with injuries. And, we saw that with Saquon. We saw that with Christian McCaffrey. When the whole offense goes through them as a running back, you are going to get those knocks and those bumps and, injuries that are difficult to overcome. But I do think he's in a better situation now with a better quarterback. I'm kind of with you in the sense that I don't know that Matt Rule knew how to get quite the most out of him. But equally, I think he just wasn't fit enough to really, do loads with. And I think they were maybe trying to compensate for that. So I think he's on for an absolutely barnstorming year in all likelihood. I think the guy is an absolutely top tier running back, and I would not be surprised to see him at close to the top of the chart, certainly in, combined yards.
Yeah, same here. I think if he can stay healthy, he is the main offensive weapon of that team. He can run the ball, he can catch the ball. He's shown he can do it when he is the focal point of that offense. So it's not like they had him and some stellar receivers and a good quarterback and now we don't know what he's going to do without that. I think they've got a better quarterback than they had last year. And obviously last year, I think he looked good the first couple of games and then just went down, didn't he? But yeah, absolutely no argument from me. I think he's going to bounce back with another good season like he had in 2019.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to sound just like an echo of previous points. I don't think Christian McCaffrey is even a comeback player of a sort. I think if we talk about Beckham and that doubt about can he get back to that level, I think a fit Christian McCaffrey is an absolute animal. Only to kind of try and build some credibility in the things I say. We mentioned at length last week the fact that I counted out Josh Allen and maybe said that a guy who dives forward at every opportunity is not going to have a particularly successful NFL career. JB, you can vouch for me that before the Christian McCaffrey draft, I said that I've never once believed the Cardinals should trade up to get a player in the first round until I saw Christian McCaffrey. I think that guy is an absolute mountain of muscle. I mean, despite the fact he's, relatively short, he just has so much strength, great hands. I think a fit McCaffrey is an absolute weapon. The Matt Rule question, JB, is a fair one. I think Matt Rule is a great game planner and, one of these new age NFL minds who brings plenty of kind of new and some existing college ideas to kind of the pro ranks. But, I don't really think it matters with McCaffrey. I think wherever you give him the ball in whatever type of situation, he's the kind of player that can make things happen. And again, I think that it's not quite like the Browns where I think if Odell Beckham gets rolling, they could really be a contender. I think without Christian McCaffrey rolling, the Panthers' ceiling just falls massively from, division candidates to almost immediately also Rams. But yeah, I like the Christian McCaffrey shout. I think a great player. And again, just so exciting to watch when he's playing well, just like Beckham Jr. Wouldn't it be great to have him back?
Well, I remember the Panthers game that we went to in London. And apologies to, again, an unnamed member of our podcast who the Panthers team played, and we had to all sort of bask in his sorrow as it didn't quite go as well as he expected for Jameis Winston. But yeah, I remember sitting there and watching and thinking, we are watching.
I'd say, interrupted, I'd say it did go as expected for Jameis Winston, if anything, but there we go.
I think also these are the days where Phil wasn't quite as bothered because Tampa hadn't won the Super Bowl as recently. It was only in the last, 4 months that we've seen the full kit come out and Phil Bushby go round looking like a walk-in Tampa Bay billboard.
Absolutely.
And also, can I just say that talking about not only did I predict Christian McCaffrey being an absolute bona fide superstar, I also predicted 3 picks by halftime.
But that was
absolutely correct.
But that was why I kind of said it didn't go as expected. We had all expected Jameis to have a bit of a net. I don't think any of us had expected Phil's heart to be broken on an interception on the very first pass of the game. But again, we have been there at times when we have been lucky enough to see games in London, and we have seen star players. We have seen players that you sit and watch and thinking, we're watching the Vikings, but we're not really. We're here to watch Adrian Peterson because that is a generational talent. It was the same with the Panthers. It was, the Panthers have got some good players, but ultimately you are watching that Panthers offense to see what they do and what Christian McCaffrey does to take over the game. And man, if the Panthers get that this coming season, that's going to be an interesting division to watch.
Yeah. You make a really good point there at the very end.
With the last point with everything else nonsense. But
no, there were good points before that, JB, you know what I mean. With the Adrian Peterson kind of mention, because actually Adrian Peterson for me is not only, again, you know, absolute lock as a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest of all time at the position, but his career does show the difference that can be made by the way that coaches want to utilise you as a running back, particularly when you think about him going to New Orleans. And I know that was kind of running back by committee, and actually very good running backs by committee. You know, it was always going to be difficult to get the lion's share of those snaps. But I mean, when he went to the Cardinals, and I think actually even more impressively, probably to the Washington football team, you saw the fact that actually, you know, people weren't prepared to start building a team around him because the guy was, you know, approaching the tail end of his career in Washington. But he could still perform. He was still a guy who was kind of averaging great yards per carry, had speed, strength, not necessarily the ability to make guys miss. And I guess your point about Matt Rule and McCaffrey is probably an interesting one, that, you know, maybe, you know, the Derrick Henry Vrabel type connection is something that we shouldn't underestimate and something that McCaffrey might rely on in the year ahead. So 2 down. Halfway through our little hot shot of 4 players, and PB, it's over to you. Give me your comeback candidate for 2021.
So if you'd asked me this 2 weeks ago, I'd have probably picked Saquon Barkley. You know, he went down with a terrible injury, but it looks like he's, you know, the surgery's gone well, and his pre-season regime, the off-season regime's gone well, and he looks like an absolute beast. But given the circus almost that it seems to be around the Giants camp at the moment, and everything that's going on there, and newly signed players retiring and all that kind of stuff, I think I'm probably going to steer clear about that and actually maybe pick someone a bit left field, and go for Nick Bosa as my kind of comeback player here. Now, you know, he burst onto the scene when he first came in as a rookie in 2019. He had 9 sacks, 25 quarterback hits. Made the Pro Bowl in his first season, defensive rookie of the year, you know, and I think everybody expected year 2, he'll only get better from there and improve and go on. And then obviously he went down with a torn ACL in week 2, and it totally took him out for the season. So I think the potential is there, and if he's rehabbed and recovered well, and he's not limited when he gets back on the field, then I think he's going to have an absolute burner of a season. I think the 49ers were unlucky last year with injuries, and I think they're going to come back stronger in probably one of the toughest divisions in the NFL. So for me, look, I think he's easily kind of the strongest contender on the defensive side of the ball for comeback player of the year. And, you know, he could just as easily win defensive player of the year if his injury doesn't limit him and he comes off, you know, picking up from where he was in his rookie season. So I think that, you know, there's family pedigree there. Obviously his older brother Joey is a star on the defensive side of the ball in the league. So yeah, for me, I think he's going to come back and he's going to have a really good season this year.
So I want to pick up on something then. You talked about Nick Bosa's potential to be a defensive player of the year. And I would never want to rule anybody out. But I think ultimately we exist in a league that contains Aaron Donald and TJ Watt. And until anyone can trump that, I think they are always going to be the leader.
Watt. JB, it's pronounced JJ Watt. You were talking about defensive player of the year candidates, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. JJ Watt. Yeah,
oh, no.
The better Watt brother. Yeah. Sorry, the Bosas must have just confused you there a minute.
I'm not entirely sure I'd go with that. But we're not talking about the Watts. We are talking about the Bosas. And I think Phil's got a good point there. I think with the incredible performance that kind of you saw from Nick Bosa in his rookie season, it can only be described as kind of heartbreaking and disappointing from an on-the-field perspective when he went down with his injury, because you are robbed of that kind of dynamic player, that dynamic nuisance that you kind of want from your line, from your pass rushers. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here, because not every player bounces back from those kinds of injuries in the same, and kind of there's going to potentially be a kind of a couple of early things where it's like, cool, can he trust the leg? Can he trust his body with what he's doing? Is he going to throw himself into everything with the same kind of force that he did before? I also think it's going to be interesting in terms of league, because I think you calling that as one of the more competitive divisions, I'm looking at that and thinking, well, the Rams have got a new quarterback that they're trying to sort of bed in and see what they can do things with. You've got the Seahawks, who I don't personally have a complete amount of faith in. I'm not sure they're the same Seahawks that we've seen before, which then opens it up to be like, well, the Cardinals might have a bit of a better season, and also, well, where does that sit with the 49ers? If they've potentially solved their quarterback issue, they've got Bosa back. If you've kind of got those kind of pieces coming back together, does this look like another Super Bowl run for the 49ers potentially?
The 49ers are bouncing back. Relies on about 4 or 5 bounce back players though, doesn't it? I still think it relies on Garoppolo, despite the fact that, you know, they've got a rookie who may not end up having any kind of redshirt season. I just think, you know, there were so many players, Kittle and their defense and offense were pretty much decimated by injuries last year. There's an argument either way, isn't there, for the 49ers? You kind of go, this is a team who had, you know, a run all the way to the Super Bowl in recent memory. This is a team with great pedigree throughout the roster, great coaching setup and so on. But I just think there's too many elements that need to go right for the 49ers. I mean, I could see them winning the division. I mean, I think like you, I think without Russell Wilson, the Seahawks would look incredibly ordinary. The fact that with Russell Wilson, they're still well above an average NFL team is the problem for Cardinals fans, I suppose. But yeah, the Bosa comeback, I think, is more likely than the 49ers comeback, just because they feel like a team in transition. I think any season where you're going in not truly knowing who your number one quarterback is, that's not normally a recipe for success. What I will say is they could have 2 very good ones in that building. I certainly still rate Garoppolo. It's a weird one. You know, people might look at Bosa and think, you know, he's not bouncing back. Anywho.
I'm kind of with you. I think Nick Bosa looked amazing coming out of college, but he even came into the league with that, was it the with his abductor injury or something like that? So he does have a little bit of pedigree for injuries there. I do think he can be amazing. My only concern is I just feel like for the 49ers, there is a reliance on him to be the whole pass rush. I know since they lost DeForest Buckner to us at the Colts, they drafted Javon Kinlaw, and that's just not really worked out. I mean, the guy's got 1.5 sacks total, whereas you'd really want to see a lot more pressure. Now, I know there's a certain element of, like Rob said, that whole unit was decimated anyway, but I do really feel like they're almost entirely reliant on Bosa being that whole pass rush. And again, it just worries me that kind of what I was talking about with CMC, you know, that over-reliance on one particular player forces you to overuse them sometimes, put them in situations where you might not necessarily, if you wanted to, you know, give them a break and not have them in at every snap. But I mean, the guy's got enough pedigree and enough talent to absolutely have a storming comeback year. So yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. I'm just concerned that, again, that over-reliance on him might end up creating more injuries, and it's a slippery slope when that starts.
It's one of those that you've got to remember D Ford as well. I mean, D Ford's a funny one because, again, he needs a real comeback season. He's more in that mould of, I'm not necessarily sure he'll ever find it. It seems a long time since we really had high hopes for him now, with injuries and one thing in another. But yeah, there just feels like a few too many things that need to go right for the 49ers.
I agree.
So, does it roll around to me?
It's you.
Am I the only one left? Right. Crikey, God, we've got through those quick enough. So, nice work with the brothers Bosa there Phil. JB and I will argue over the brothers what another time. So mine, I'll kind of, as I go last, it's a little bit like, the maths equation on Countdown. I'll take you through my working out. So initially I was going to go with some of the kind of names you've all mentioned. Then I thought, do I go Cardinals focused? And then I thought, do I go Chandler Jones? Do I even go real left field and go Larry Fitzgerald, who hasn't even signed yet for the coming season, and there's still rumours swirling about whether he'll come back or not? Then I thought, well, do I go even further down the line and look at somebody like a Todd Gurley again, who's, out at the moment, could come back in a good role if, a running back needy team or a running centric team were to lose a star player to injury early on in the season. And then it kind of led me to two different thoughts. Now, one's been mentioned already, Sam Darnold, who I think could be on the verge of a much better season in Carolina. And then I thought to myself, well, is that really a comeback? Has Sam Darnold in NFL terms ever quite been there anyway? And I look back at his stats, and really the peak of Sam Darnold's powers were his NFL debut stats against the Lions. Threw a pick six with his first throw, then basically came back to absolutely trounce the Lions and put 40 points on the board in his first NFL start. So Sam Darnold didn't quite make the list. So the one I'm going for, completely out of left field, is Jared Goff. Right? And the reason I want to pick Jared Goff as a comeback candidate is, let's think about where he's coming back from. Because there are players whose careers go off the rails because of injury or off the rails because of a dip in performance. His career came off the rails in the Super Bowl. If you think about all of the shop windows, all of the moments as a sportsman where you want things to go right, that absolutely would be top of the pile for any NFL player. And I really feel for Jared Goff because, as much as I question the decision, Les Snead was ready to pay that guy an absolute fortune to lead that Rams offense with Sean McVay because they clearly saw something in him. And do you know what? In NFL terms, I think he has flashed the type of talent he has. We've seen it in moments, and we've also seen him looking good in what is a very, very good, star-studded, well-balanced, Sean McVay crafted offense. But now I look at Jared Goff and think he's going to a Detroit Lions team that are not only rebuilding, but are rebuilding long-term. We've seen them kind of stack up draft picks, not even for this season, but for next. And they're probably looking at, some kind of 4-5 year rebuild under a new head coach. And I think, well, you know what? Goff is of the right age. Goff is, surely got enough arm talent. I mean, I don't particularly rate Matthew Stafford, as I've said a few times on this podcast. Surely he's got enough to prove a few people wrong. And the reason I would love this to come off, not only because Goff's now out of the NFC West, so I'm quite happy for him to achieve all kinds of things. Now he's a bit of a distance from the Cardinals. The other thing is I think everything is stacked against him. The fact that actually the Lions are probably already looking beyond Goff to see who they might pick with, a top 5 pick in 12 months' time. I would just love him to absolutely change that NFL narrative and put on a bit of a show as he does. I think they're a bit devoid of talent. I think if anything, you'd probably say the Lions are experimental, or if you were going to be a little more favourable than that, young and hungry maybe would be the phrase I would use. But, for me, I would love Goff's career to have a flourish rather than end up, pulling into Shattered Dreams Parkway.
I don't know. I think the only thing with Jared Goff for me is that he's not in a good situation. I don't really go along with the narrative that seems to be around him that, he's no good and this, that and the other and he's washed and all that kind of stuff. Because, I think ultimately you think it wasn't, I know he was taken high and there was always question marks around that. But, the guy got his team to a Super Bowl. I don't think you can neglect that. That doesn't just happen. That's not just a strong running game. That's, good quarterback play all round. So I do think he has got the potential. And I think the the way in which he left the Rams probably gives him a bit more of that edge, a bit more of that chip on his shoulder, like we kind of talked about before, because the guy was almost unceremoniously dumped out of that organization, and they were quite happy to take a big hit on money in order to get a shot of him too. So it's not like it was, a mutual parting of the ways. It was very much chucked out by the back door, really. So from that respect, I think he's got the ability, and I think he's got that kind of chip on his shoulder and a bit of that edge that would certainly go along with that sort of comeback candidate that you were talking about. My only big concern with that is the organisation he's in and the fact that they feel like another year or two away for, like, I feel like they're on the road to rebuild. So they haven't got great tight ends, not great receivers. I mean, I just feel like there's not enough around him for him to be successful. But I could be proved wrong. But I think as a talent, he's got the ability to do it. I just don't know that the situation will allow him to do that.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that Jared Goff has faced is the fact that it became known in kind of Sean McVay's first season that McVay was kind of diagnosing the field for him and kind of telling him what to do. All of that was made of the fact that, McVay talks right up until the point that the helmet earpiece cuts off and doesn't allow anything there. So I think Goff has always had that kind of negative thing about him for the fact that, well, how much of what he was doing was him and how much of it was just Sean McVay diagnosing everything for him and basically Sean McVay playing Madden with the Los Angeles Rams. And if you're going to go to a team that kind of wants to amplify the chip on your shoulder and kind of give you that kind of edge, I think going to the Detroit Lions with head coach Dan Campbell is kind of that kind of thing. He's already spoken about biting people's kneecaps off and all of that kind of stuff. And I think he's going to, my assumption is based on everything he's putting out in the media, his persona is kind of going to be saying that to Jared Goff. It's going to be that kind of thing of, look, everyone doubts you. We are going to absolutely crush these fools. We are going to destroy everybody. We are going to leave broken teams in our wake. And it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, because legitimately, I don't know. Like, I've got a strong feeling on how OBJ is going to do. I've got a strong feeling on Christian McCaffrey and Nick Bosa. But for Jared Goff, it's like, well, this could easily be a disaster, just as this could easily be us looking and going, wow, Sean McVay absolutely made the wrong decision here. And the sort of the Lions fans who at the start were kind of chasing Dan Campbell down to kind of ask him what are they doing, just going, Dan. Now they're just going to be chasing him down to be like, Dan, you made a great choice there.
Yeah, for me, I don't know. I don't think Detroit have improved enough around Goff for, I think Stafford held that team together, and I think they're going to struggle again this year. I kind of like how Campbell's dealt with himself, and he's got a personality about him, and I quite like that, and the way he comes across a little bit. But at the same time, I do wonder if he's just going to be a one and done head coach. They're not going to really improve this season, and then that'll be it. So I don't know. I think for me, I think Goff's got to start well to kind of have any chance really of kind of being that comeback player. And I'm not so sure, I don't think he's a dreadful quarterback. I think he's a serviceable starting quarterback, but I don't see him as a top 10 quarterback in the league. And I think he had a much better supporting cast with the Rams, where he didn't really, all right, he took him to a Super Bowl, but like you said, how much of that was down to McVay. I don't think there's enough that he showed that kind of gives me faith to say he's the guy that's going to really turn the Detroit Lions around. So yeah, for me, it's a hard pass on that one.
Just let me wow you with statistics one last time before we call it a day. This season where Sean McVay clearly did. I mean, whether it was a loss of faith or as it was reported in some areas, a real falling out between the two of them. This 2020 season, where we're all imagining the wheels fell off for Jared Goff, he ended up 48 yards short of 4,000 yards, a pretty strong measure in today's NFL if you're a 4,000 yard a season quarterback, which, by the way, he eclipsed the previous 2 years in 2018, 2019, more than 4,500 yards. He had 20 TDs against 13 interceptions and a passer rating of 90. Now, if you just compare the numbers, and there's an argument that absolutely exists, JB, about how much of that is McVay and how much of that is Goff. Well, for as much as I'm sure McVay is, and I rate him incredibly highly as a head coach, we always had this about how much was Belichick, how much was Brady type argument. You know, how much was Josh Norman helped by Luke Kuechly? You know, these arguments have existed for as long as sports existed, I suppose. And I just think the truth is always somewhere in the middle. You know, to imagine that Sean McVay was able to do this with this completely ordinary quarterback makes no sense to me. I'm with you, Phil. I think the Detroit Lions have nothing else around him. The only thing that makes me think, I'd argue your could Campbell go one and done kind of suggestion, only because how bad would the Lions have to be for him to lose his job? I mean, I think people pretty much think they'll be horrible anyway. So, I mean, unless they literally had a winless season, I mean, he'd really have to go some, you'd think, to be out of a job. But I don't know. I just felt that rather than pick this guy's injured, can he come back? I think for me, Jared Goff's story is one of redemption, isn't it? Because that is as public a divorce as I think the NFL tends to give you. And I just absolutely love him to find his way back. And also I just don't get the Stafford thing, I suppose. You know, if Wings were the band the Beatles could have been, is Jared Goff the quarterback that Matthew Stafford could have been in LA? Stranger things have happened. That's all I'm saying, guys.
See, part of me really wants to stand up to this Matt Stafford slander, because as we often say in our group, right? If he can throw the ball, if you need him to throw the ball, and I think I said this I said this several podcasts ago, several months ago. I'm very excited about seeing Matt Stafford in a Sean McVay offense. I think that is going to be absolute bombs away. Sort of circling back to kind of our Dan Campbell conversation, there is a part of how Dan Campbell carries himself with kind of his attitude and his mentality that to me rings very similar to that Bears era Mike Ditka. Now, it's a very different comparison because obviously Ditka had that defense and Walter Payton, one of, if not the greatest running back of all times, whereas Dan Campbell doesn't. But he's still got that kind of fight attitude, like we're going to fight for absolutely everything. No one's going to give us an inch, so we are going to take a mile from them. And looking at how the Lions have performed over the last, for the last decade, at the very least for the time since I've been watching, they have always been one of those teams that just don't really seem to have an identity. They just turn up, play, and go home, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. And you just kind of get the impression that what he is going to do is he's going to at least turn the Lions into a team with an identity, and that will probably come back to Jared Goff in that sense of, okay, we are going to prove who we are.
Well, I tell you what, it sounds like we have rounded out another show that ultimately I would describe as podcast gold. We leave our listeners thinking of poor Jared Goff, sitting in a hotel room somewhere, dismantling his Corby trouser press, just absolutely gearing up for what could be a brilliant 2021 NFL season. But guys, I think some brilliant picks. Before we go, any other honourable mentions? I mean, I'll throw out Chandler Jones, as I said earlier. I think should be an honourable mention for the Cardinals. Any more you'd like to throw away?
Well, my one, oddly, which was the inspiration for the podcast, was AJ Green. Just there seems to be a lot of buzz from the AZ camp that he's got a good connection with Murray and that he's looking good, making nice cuts. I mean, the thing with him is that can he stay fit long enough to be relevant and not get turf toe or an ankle injury like he perennially gets every single year. But he was the one that stood out to me. I just read an interesting stat about him, so he was the other one.
I like it. I mean, I think his best chance in Arizona comes from the fact that we don't really have... I mean, Dan Arnold really was our red zone threat of that type last season at tight end, that big-bodied, tall receiver that Murray kind of looked for in the, those kind of really tight, short yardage, where the field is so condensed. And yeah, I like Green. I mean, all the kind of training camp videos I've watched, there's a lot of mic'd up Cliff Kingsbury snippets and sound bites, talking about how he can still play. I'd love him to. I think Christian Kirk is a great player. I think Andy Isabella again. I mean, I'd almost mention him as a comeback candidate if he'd ever hit the heights as well. But there's a number of players there that, if they get out of each other's way, could all have very good seasons in Arizona. So yeah, I'll second AJ Green. Any others around the room?
I'll agree with AJ Green. I think especially with Larry Fitzgerald potentially having now moved on and decided that playing for an NFL team is not what he wants to do with his time. I think he gives that solid veteran presence, and you don't need him to be the star. With the Bengals, I think you always needed AJ Green to be the one that would make the plays, and he needed to be on the field for the Bengals to be effective. Whereas with the Cardinals, you've got DeAndre Hopkins, you've got Christian Kirk. I think there's a lot of buzz around Rondale Moore, kind of the rookie. So Green might function better being a cog in the machine rather than the engine that runs it. While we are talking about our own teams, I'm going to put my faith in WR19, Juju Smith-Schuster. I think it's Roethlisberger's last year. I think he's going to absolutely sling it around because I think he's going to want to go down like the gunslinger that he is, and hopefully that's going to be a very improved season for Juju.
I think that is wildly misguided.
Right, I do believe we have a lunch item based wager on that.
Indeed.
So
we do indeed. I look forward to cashing in.
Yeah, that's going to go bad. Phil, honourable mentions from you. I don't know. I mean, you've got an old quarterback that could probably do with, well, I mean, now he's cleared up all these injury problems he's been carrying for years. We get to see, I mean, hopefully the real Tom Brady. There's some potential that needs to be, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Realised? Yeah, indeed, yeah. So maybe Tom Brady can have that season we've been waiting for all these years.
Well, yeah, now he's cleared up his injuries. What do you think? 1,000 yards rushing season? Who knows? I don't know. It's hard to pick. I mentioned Saquon Barkley earlier. So I think, he potentially can have a big season. I think we've covered a fair amount of them, haven't we, really? I suppose Joe Burrow you could kind of look at. He looked quite good last year. Then he went down after that horrible injury. Was it against Washington? Yeah. So, I think they've added another receiver for him to throw to, another weapon. I think the Bengals have got some, a real good receiving threat now. I think they've got 3 potentially top wide receivers, but it's the same old thing, isn't it? Their line on paper, their offensive line looks pretty poor. So I think he's going to get hit. I think he's going to be running for his life. And that's one.
With him, I just think it goes back to one of Rob's earlier points. I just don't think he's ever been at the height that a comeback's on. I didn't see enough from him in the games that he was fit to suggest that he's any better than a Jared Goff, who we've just talked about. So
well, I don't know. I think that's doing him a bit of a disservice. I think there were games last year where they were closer than the Bengals had any right to be in with their roster purely, based on his play. So I think he'll be a decent quarterback. I think he's shown the right things so far. And the other one that I suppose I would mention, and I don't know which way I'd rather this goes, is Jameis Winston at the Saints. It's with Winston, I think we've said before, it's feast and famine. It's all good and bad at the same time. So, he'll either sink or swim, and he'll either look great and it will be a great, it will be a comeback season. And then who knows, there might be a lot of money on the table for him after that. Or
I don't think there will be.
Well,
Again,
yeah,
I think that I'm going to go back to the Juju Smith-Schuster comment. I think that's wildly misguided.
Yeah,
I think he
exactly.
inevitably gets beaten out by a glorified tight end week 3.
Well, I don't know. I don't think Taysom Hill's the guy there, and I think they know that. So I think Jameis will be the guy they run with for all of or most of the season. But yeah, whether he has a comeback season and looks like a bona fide starter, or whether it all goes down the pan, that it could, again, like the first conversation we had tonight, it could go either way.
I love that. So we end talking about the cliche magnet that is Jameis Winston. Just line him up and put them his way. My roundup, Joe Burrow, I'm not sold on. See my assessment of Josh Allen for my current hit rate when it comes to predicting future top-tier NFL quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford the same. I can already feel myself ruining those words when the Cardinals are obliterated by the Rams. But yeah, I tell you what, I think we've, like I say, absolute podcast gold, gentlemen. We'll come back in a week to do it all again. As always, for our listenership out there, you can email us at clubdubpodcast@mail.com and let us know your own thoughts, or join our conversation pieces on Twitter. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. 7 days, we'll have another topic and be another week closer to regular season football. But yeah, enjoy yourselves, and I'll catch up with you next time.
Cheers, Rob.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.